Okay, so we have we're on to book three, and the continual journey of Telemachus, actually the beginning, in a way, of his geographical journey. Emily Wilson titles book three "An Old King Remembers." So again, have your Emily Wilson translation out, and what I do, particularly for the first several chapters with my students in class, or they can access this video, is to give some background on the chapter of the book, read some key passages, just so they're sort of anchored and grounded as they read for the first time. There's a lot going on. And again, these are people that know each other, or their families know each other so well that they can tell stories in a sort of shorthand. So just know, as I say all the time, that anything Homer wants us to know, he repeats. And an example of that in this chapter is the Odysseus story from the return from the Trojan War. So we'll get into that. So I'd begin class just discussing their homework, and the homework was to look at our reading of book two and answer the question, who among all the adults or gods gives Telemachus the best advice, and why? And I think in the beginning of book three, before reading book three, I think it's a really good exercise, whether we're just by ourselves, engaging with the Odyssey, or in a classroom setting, to think about the central idea of, to a large extent, the first four chapters, the Telemachy, right? The story of Telemachus. And that one of the central ideas is the notion of mentoring, not just the character himself mentor, but what makes for a good mentor in the world of the Odyssey. So I think to ground us in this notion, it's not bad to stop and for a minute maybe make a list of the people in our life who are mentors for us, a guide for us, a guide to living a better life. It might be family members, co-workers, friends. But I think it's good for, readers, students, whoever, to sit and just discuss this for a few minutes, and it in a way conditions us to read book three and four. So we head to Pylos, from Ithaca to Pylos, where there's King Nestor who knew Odysseus. And again, Telemachus is simply doing what Athena, the goddess, wants, going to a couple of different places to engage with a couple of different men who may have information about Odysseus. So what I would like everybody to do when they listen to Emily Wilson's translation of this, or read it, is mark book three with a particular focus on moments where you think Nestor is being a good Greek or a good host. And just as a reminder, the code of the time is really, really important, that when a stranger appeared at your door, the first thing you did was not ask for ID. Some of the first things you did were to feed them, allow them to wash or bathe, sometimes even allow them to sleep the night. And only when you sort of took care of the people could you ask that standard, the Odyssey question, which was, who are you? Where are you from? What are you doing? But it's really interesting that meeting strangers in this context, that the right thing to do is not to interrogate them, but to take care of them. So mark your books for moments where Nestor is being a good host. And that's a good subject of conversation. So once Telemachus lands in Pylos with his men, and I'm not going to read all the moments where Nestor is clearly taking care of things, but again, pay close attention to them. Pay really close attention to what Nestor remembers. If you go to page 130, 138, line 102, Telemachus just says, tell me the truth. Tell me what you know. So it's line 102 on page 138. Nestor says, Grania Nestor, horse lord, answered him, dear boy, you call to mind how much we've suffered, with strong, unyielding hearts, in distant lands, when we were sailing over misty seas, led by Achilles on a hunt for spoils, and when we fought around the mighty city of Priam. Our best warriors were killed. Ajax lies dead there, and there lies Achilles, and there lies his godlike friend and guide Patroclus. My own strong, matchless son lies dead there too. Antilochus, who fought and ran so well, more pain, more grief. Our sufferings increased. Who could recount so many, many losses? If you stayed here 5 years and kept on asking how many things the fighters suffered there, you'd get bored and go back home again before the story ended. 9 long years we schemed to bring them down, and finally, Zeus made our plots succeed. Odysseus, your father, if you are really his son, well, no one dared to try to equal him in cleverness. That man was always best at every kind of trick. And seeing you, I'm amazed at how you talk like him. So there's obviously a lot going on here, and a point of conversation after reading could definitely focus on the way this story is told. And I can't help but to think that so many soldiers returning home from war, maybe with some of the details changed, can think and feel this. Who could recount so many, many losses? He's the king of this great nation. He has everything he needs. And this pain still lives with him. So next, Telemachus ends up saying something somewhat bold. On page 141, line 185, we finally get Nestor, who, admittedly is an older person who maybe likes the sound of his own voice, or this is just a really powerful, important story to him. He says in line 185, finally the answer to what Telemachus is there for. So, my dear boy, I have no news about what happened next. I do not know which of them has died and who is safe. But I can tell you what I heard while sitting here in my halls. You ought to know. They say Achilles' son led home the Myrmidons, and Philoctetes came back home with glory, and Idomeneus led back his crew to Crete. So these are just, the sort of after battle information that he does have. No man of his who'd survived the war was lost at sea. And Agamemnon, again, he's the head of all the Greeks, right? Odysseus' leader. You must have heard, though you live far away, Aegisthus murdered him. So Agamemnon fights for 10 years only to be killed when he returns back home. But Aegisthus paid a bitter price. How fortunate the dead man had left a son to take revenge upon the wicked, scheming killer, that Aegisthus, who killed Orestes' father. So Orestes, son of Agamemnon, avenges his father Agamemnon's murder and kills Aegisthus. This has been mentioned a few times already, and we're in book 3. My dear boy, I see that you are tall and strong. Be brave, so you will be remembered. That idea of kleos, glory leading to your eternal life. Now, Telemachus ends up saying, Nestor basically says, talks about what's fated to be, and it seems like Nestor suggests that it seems like Athena has the fates on her side. And Telemachus says in the middle of page 142, if you can go there around line 226, it says, then Telemachus replied, my lord, he's talking to Nestor, I doubt that this will happen. I'm surprised you have such confidence. I would not be so hopeful even if the gods were willing. It's that even if the gods were willing part that would be bothersome. These are the 3 fates, this picture here, who, in a lot of respects, are more powerful than the gods in ancient Greek mythology. They determine the sort of goings-on of the universe. So to talk about, for Telemachus to say, even if the gods want things to be, I don't think things are going to go well. That lack of hope would be troubling. And again, I keep going back to this. This is on page 143. When you're reading really difficult old books, my other classes right now are reading Hamlet, and the same thing applies there, although it's a very different book, obviously, than the Odyssey. Pay close attention to when authors repeat themselves, whether it's a word, a phrase, or something that comes up again and again in a text. I often think it's an author's way of making us pay really close attention that, as I say, we're not going to get all of the Odyssey, all the allusions, all the references, all the backstory, all the names, all the geography. We're not. But for whatever reason, this story comes up again and again and again. It's not the primary story of the narrative, right? The primary story of the narrative is, so far, Telemachus's problems, Athena's problems, and Telemachus's problems and Penelope's problems, and then the mystery of Odysseus' situation. Just this Agamemnon story seems tangential at best, but it keeps coming up. So I'm not going to say what it means. I'm just going to suggest that when you notice something coming up over and over again, mark it, pay attention to it, raise it in class, have a conversation. If you go to line 253, Nestor says, Nestor, Lord of Horses, answered, I'll tell everything, though you can guess what would have happened if fair Menelaus had found Aegisthus living in his halls on his return. And even when he died, no one would bury him. This is, again, the worst fate if you're an ancient Greek, to not have a respectful burial, right? He lay upon the open plain without a tomb and far from town for birds and dogs to eat. No Greek would mourn that monster. While we fought and labored at Troy, this layabout lay safe in Argos, seducing Clytemnestra, noble wife of Agamemnon. For a while she scorned his foul suggestion, since her heart was good. Moreover, when her husband went to Troy, he left a poet, ordered to protect her. But finally fate, I never understand this, fate forced the queen to yield. Aegisthus left the poet to be eaten by birds, abandoned on a desert island. He led the woman back to his own house by mutual desire, so he's won her over. Then he made numerous offerings on holy altars of animals and lovely gold and cloth. He'd succeeded far beyond his hopes. So again, just to be super clear, this is the wife of the leader of all the Greeks, the leader of Achilles, the leader of Odysseus, the leader of Patroclus, who survives this 10-year ordeal at the Trojan War, returns home only to be killed by his wife's lover. And it seems like it's being suggested here that his wife is now on board with this. And meanwhile, I left Troy, this is Nestor talking, with Menelaus. We sailed together, best of friends. Okay, so I just wanted to mention the story of Aegisthus. Just keep an eye on it. It might not be bad to start asking if the primary story involves a father and a son, and the primary story, Telemachus and Odysseus, and the primary story involves a marriage between Penelope and Odysseus. What is the story of Aegisthus, Clytemnestra, Agamemnon? What is this doing here? So that's not a bad thing to ask. If you turn the page and go to line 371, Nestor has advised, just like Athena did, Nestor advised Telemachus to go see Menelaus, another man who fought and served with Telemachus's father, Odysseus. And Athena, who's in disguise, who's there obviously with Telemachus, but in disguise, flies away in the form of an ossifrage or a vulture. So watch this, line 371 on page 147. Bright-eyed Athena flew away, transformed into an ossifrage, vulture. Astonishment seized all the people watching, even Nestor. He seized Telemachus' hand and said, Dear boy, I am now sure that you will be a hero, since the gods are on your side at your age. This was a god, none other than the great Athena, true-born child of Zeus, who also glorified your noble father. Goddess, be kind to us as well, and grant honor to me, my good wife, and our sons. Now I will sacrifice a yearling heifer, broad-browed and still unyoked, and gild her horns with gold to bless your journey. So again, with the notion of is he a good host, Nestor recognizes the presence of the gods and immediately does what a good Greek does, is sacrifice an animal for the gods. And then Vegans Beware could be a subtitle of this entire epic poem. But what does an ancient blood sacrifice look like? If you want to read it, you get a play-by-play of it on page 149. And I'll just point you to line 445, if you can go to line 445. And again, if you're a vegan, you can mute for like 30 seconds. Nestor started to sprinkle barley groats in ritual water, and as he threw the hairs into the fire, he said prayers to Athena. When the rites were finished, mighty Thesmides struck. The axe sliced through the sinews of the neck. The cow was paralyzed. Then Nestor's daughters and his sons' wives and his own loyal queen Eurydice began to chant. The men hoisted the body, and Pisistratus sliced through her throat. Black blood poured out. The life was gone. They butchered her, cut out the thighs all in the proper place, and covered them with double fat and placed raw flesh upon them. The old king burned the pieces on the logs and poured the bright red wine. The young man came to stand beside them holding the 5-pronged forks. They burned the thigh bones thoroughly and tasted the entrails, then carved up the rest and skewered the meat on pointed spits and roasted it. So it's interesting. Another thing that comes up that might be worth talking about is how these chapters are ending. They seem to just discuss very large issues of fate and heroism and loss and family and evil. And so far, the first 3 chapters, it's almost like the camera zooms into something really small, like, Telemachus sort of tucked into his bed, and we get the details of the door and his nanny, as Emily Wilson calls her, tucking him in. And here we get this sort of graphic detail of like a single moment. So just something to think about. If you were thinking about something to bring up in class, or if you're wondering, what's something to write about, Telemachus, as it says here, is on a fact-finding mission. He has one job, right? He has the job of finding out information about his father now. He doesn't go and he's not writing a book about his dad. He wants to know where he is now. Homer must have seen a reason to send Telemachus to Nestor, which is weird because Nestor has no current information. So I'm just presuming that, okay, so what's this doing there then? So here's a question. What are some ways that Nestor is a good mentor or guide to Telemachus? Because like I said, the weird thing is he actually doesn't give him the knowledge he's looking for. What does he give him? So that's just a preview of book 3. We kind of do a little deep dive and we sort of explode open Telemachus. Telemachus's world is sort of opening now. He's leaving his homeland, talking to other people, hearing other stories, and probably some details that he's never considered before.